We'll find out in coming days and weeks. We're going to go live, though, to Melbourne, where the Minister for Urban Infrastructure, Paul Fletcher, is standing by. Good morning, Paul.
Good to be with you, Sam.
Now, you are going to announce today, you're announcing some changes in relation to vehicle standards. I'll get to that in a moment. If I could start with the Royal Commission, though, into child sex abuse. It has just handed its final report to the Governor-General. That will be released by the government shortly. What will be the government's response to that? Will you accept all of the findings? And what are the plans in terms of redress to victims of these absolutely horrific and tragic historic sex abuse by churches and other institutions?
Well, look, I'll leave it to the Prime Minister and the responsible Minister, Christian Porter, to comment on behalf of the government. Obviously, this has been a very substantial exercise over a number of years, a very thorough and careful examination of what happened in a whole range of institutions around Australia. I think it's been very important for those victims of abuse who've had the opportunity to be heard. That's been an important process. Obviously, we now need to carefully study the recommendations. The government will certainly be doing that, but I'll leave it to the Prime Minister and to the responsible Minister and Christian Porter to be responding on behalf of the government.
Do you think that Christian Porter made a mistake yesterday, choosing to go to the Ashes test and have a selfie taken of himself with the Prime Minister, former Prime Minister John Howard, rather than attend either the final hearing of the Royal Commission, which was attended by the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and Bill Shorten, or the handing over of that document in Canberra?
Look, can I say Christian Porter is an outstanding minister. He's worked on this issue very, very conscientiously. And I know he will be giving very careful consideration to the recommendations, as will the Prime Minister, as will the government. This is a very important issue, obviously, for all of those who've had the opportunity to be heard. There's now, as I understand it, an extensive series of detailed recommendations. Those need to be carefully studied by the government, so I will leave it to the Prime Minister and to the responsible Minister, Christian Porter, to comment on behalf of the government.
OK, I understand, though, that Christian Porter is not announcing anything today in relation to the redress scheme. He's going to be saying that they've developed the scheme in consultation with organisations and states and now want them to commit to the scheme. Do you think that that's enough?
Well, again, I'll leave it to the Prime Minister and the responsible Minister to respond on the details. What I would say is that Christian Porter, as the relevant Minister, has done an enormous amount of work in this area, and obviously very careful work is required in designing and implementing a scheme. I'll leave it to the Prime Minister and the responsible Minister to comment in more detail, but Christian Porter has given this very close and careful attention. I know he will continue to do so, and we will be carefully considering the recommendations from the Royal Commission.
OK, if a state decides not to join that redress scheme in some way that the Commonwealth is negotiating, will that allow them to opt out and to actually not provide compensation for victims?
Well, again, Sam, I will leave it to the Prime Minister and the responsible Minister to comment on the details of the scheme. I would simply say that Christian Porter has given this close and careful attention. He's been working on it for a substantial period of time, and of course we'll now be considering the detailed recommendations of the Royal Commission, and I'll leave it to the Prime Minister and the responsible Minister to respond on behalf of the government.
OK, do you think, though, just so I'm clear, that Christian Porter made the right call in going to the cricket? Why did he go to the cricket rather than actually be on site to talk to victims?
Look, I'm totally confident that Christian made the right judgment there. Ministers weigh up and deal with a whole lot of issues on a day-to-day basis. Of course, the Prime Minister certainly was in attendance. You couldn't show a higher degree of engagement from government than having the presence of the Prime Minister. But can I assure you, this is an issue on which Christian Porter has been very closely and carefully engaged for many, many months. And he, of course, together with the Prime Minister, will now be considering the detailed recommendations, and they'll have more to say on behalf of the government in due course.
OK, but why is it the right decision to go to the Ashes test rather than talk to victims of child sex abuse on the day that they have the final hearing of the Royal Commission after 5 years?
Can I say I have full confidence in Christian. I'm confident he made the right judgment. And if you have further questions about the details of the government's response in this area, they're best directed to the Prime Minister and to the responsible Minister, Christian Porter.
Fair enough. Now, you've been on the ground in Bennelong. You're a Sydney MP. What's your tip for election night? Who do you think is going to pick up the seat?
Look, I have had the chance to campaign with John Alexander in a number of locations over the past few weeks. Meadowbank, Putney, Macquarie Park, Epping. John's doing a terrific job. He's working very hard. He's a very well-respected local member. He's been in place since 2010. His vote has consistently increased at each election, which is a very good sign. But this is close. As the Prime Minister has said, this is close. There's a lot at stake. If Bill Shorten and Christina Keneally win this, then that is bad news for the people of Bennelong. And there's a very stark choice here. The Liberal Party, John Alexander, is offering a continuation of the policies which have seen very strong growth in jobs. You know, we're creating jobs at the rate of about 388,000, just 338,000 the last 12 months. That's about 1,000 jobs a day. That's an extraordinary rate of job growth. John Alexander is a very big supporter of small businesses, of the 86% of Australians who work in the private sector. He's a very big supporter of the private sector. He's a successful and experienced businessman as well as a Australian tennis champion. And he's worked so hard. He's been such a strong voice for Bennelong. So it's very important that he is voted back tomorrow.
Are you disappointed that John Alexander has failed to declare his rental income for that luxury property in the Southern Highlands? It's rented out, according to Stays, for up to $1,400 a day. Did he forget about that when he was filling out his form to Parliament of declaring his financial interests?
Look, let's be clear. This is another misleading and desperate claim from a Labor Party which is prepared to say anything, frankly, in this election context. It's clear when you look at the registers of parliamentarians' financial interests that Labor parliamentarians like Anthony Albanese, Tanya Plibersek have declared that they own second or investment properties. There's nothing wrong with that, but they haven't declared the income from them. Now, the policy issue is it's important that Australians are aware if their parliamentarians, in this case, own investment properties. John has disclosed that he owns an investment property. Obviously, people can draw the inference that he is eligible to receive investment income.
Why do they can draw that inference? You're meant to put it in your form.
Can I make the point? Just as they can draw the inference about Tanya Plibersek or Anthony Albanese. So it's a judgment for members of Parliament to make about disclosure. I'm confident in John Alexander's disclosure, and I'm confident that he represents for the people of Bennelong the opportunity for a continuation of the policies that have seen strong growth in jobs, a government tackling issues like the National Energy Guarantee, a government getting on with the job and delivering outcomes, as opposed to a Labor candidate who is frankly prepared to say whatever she thinks is necessary. And as we've just seen with this issue about what was in the book that was being talked about, Kate McClymont's book about Sam Dastyari and Eddie Obeid. You know, Sam Dastyari was quoted in that book, first and second edition, as saying Christina was so close to Eddie, unequivocally she wouldn't have been Premier if it wasn't for Eddie. Now, these are issues that are highly relevant for the people of Bennelong to understand. It's so important that we don't have this former state Labor Premier in Christina Keneally doing to Bennelong what Labor did to New South Wales. And both Eddie Obeid, of course, and Ian MacDonald are now in jail, both found to be corrupt. And Eddie Obeid was clearly a very significant factor in the Keneally government. These are things that the people of Bennelong need to be aware of and to consider as they make their judgment tomorrow about who is best placed to represent Bennelong in the National Parliament.
Okay, the Prime Minister is tipped to reshuffle his ministry shortly. There's some ministers are suggesting it could be as early as Sunday or Tuesday after MyEFO. Do you think that he's going to punt the Attorney-General, George Brandis, out of Cabinet? Look,
George Brandis has done a terrific job as Attorney-General. questions of the reshuffle are questions for the Prime Minister. He makes the decision. He's got a lot of talent to choose from. There's a lot of very talented people in the Liberal and National parties in the coalition party room. So that's an issue for the Prime Minister. It's solely his responsibility, and he will get on and make such decisions as he thinks fit.
Okay, now just finally, you're also launching some new vehicle standards today. I think it's going to make it easier for some people to import luxury cars if they're cashed up. Maybe John Alexander can get one to go with his property in the Southern Highlands. What's the good news about that?
Well, look, we've been going through a process to reform what's called the Motor Vehicle Standards Act, which regulates the first import of or the first supply of vehicles into the Australian market. We issued an exposure draft of the new legislation earlier this week. There'll now be a consultation period for a couple of months. This is about, for example, more efficiently using international standards, adopting those in the Australian design rules. Motor vehicle manufacturing is a global business, and it's important that we maintain our safety standards and that we also get the best economies for Australian motor vehicle purchases. So it's a very important area of regulation. One of the other areas that we're looking at is the question of road user charging for heavy vehicles. Trucks 4.5 tonnes and above, they today pay a charge to use the roads, and in a speech today I'll be talking about some reforms we're looking at, including potentially what we're calling a heavy vehicle user charging pilot. So this will be a pilot to be run over the next 2 or 3 years with voluntary participants looking at different ways that we might charge trucks to use the road, see if we can deliver better outcomes for our vitally important heavy vehicle industry.
All right, thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam.